Our first speaker today is Professor Lucas Richert. Professor Richert is George Erdang Chair in the History of Pharmacy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is the author of A Prescription for Scandal, Strange Trips, Break On Through, and Cannabis Global Histories. Richert is a founding member of UW-Madison's Psychoactive Pharmaceutical Investigation Program and the Transdisciplinary Center for Research in Psychoactive Substances. He is the co-editor of Social History of Alcohol and Drugs and History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals. Please welcome Professor Lucas Richert.
Welcome. Huge thanks to the organizers of the event. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful to be here. I was given a brief to, I think, bring historical perspective to today's proceedings. And so I've come up with the title, which is maybe overly ambitious, Psychedelics in the Age of Drugs. At different times and different locations, classical and non-classical psychedelics have served as sacraments, tools of mind expansion, party drugs, or therapeutic interventions. Psychedelic substances have, as we know, and I suspect many of you are psychedelic literate in the room and have a reasonable understanding of mechanisms of action and psychedelic history. They've occupied different purposes and embodied multiple meanings for different overlapping audiences. So my talk today is to provide context about psychedelics in a few ways and to share some thoughts about the processes of biomedicalization in society today. Hopefully set you up well for speakers who are following me, who will, I think, grapple more closely with conundrums with psychedelic science in the present moment. So I don't have any financial conflicts of interest, but I want to start really, really broadly with the word itself. So the word psychedelic, if we're talking context, where does this word actually come from? It comes from Humphrey Osmond interacting with Aldous Huxley. Humphrey Osmond was based in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan happens to be my home province. And he was discussing with Huxley this word that might sort of appropriately encapsulate a series of choices, a series of manifestations. So psychophoric, mind moving, philorhormic, psychozemic, philophoric, philohexic. And so really these guys were playful. They were messing around with the nature of what they thought of as the mind. And it seemed like an appropriate place to start when we're thinking about psychedelics in context. Let's start with the word itself. When we think about the age of drugs, and we'll dig a little deeper into the age that we're currently in a moment, I want to just flag up for you that there are multiple ages of drugs. This is not a uniform monolithic construct. In fact, humans have always used psychoactive substances for medicinal, social, religious, nutritional purposes. We've always lived in an age of drugs. It's inescapable. And so I just say beer, wine, opium, marijuana, tobacco, coffee, betel, coca, hallucinogens, and others or originated in prehistory. And Andrew Sherritt, as one theorist, suggests the drugs have been central to the formation of civilizations, the definition of cultural identities, and the growth of the world economy. That's from Consuming Habits, largely an anthropological and historical work from 2007. And drugs have comprised an important trade item since the beginning of commercial interaction, meaning merchants, migrants, conquerors introduced their culture's substances to others, and traffic was stimulated. which takes us to a more specific age of drugs. This is from the satirical magazine called Puck. Puck was satirical, meant to be, you were puckish. You were fooling around a little bit with politics and society. Puck was, I don't know, maybe similar to Vanity Fair or Cosmopolitan, a major magazine of the age that people talked about. And this particular chromolithograph was by a cartoonist based in New York named Louis Dalrymple. And this cartoon was first published in 1900 under the title The Age of Drugs. It showed the inside of an early 20th century drugstore, and the pharmacist, apothecary, store owner on the right, we're not exactly sure about the profession, is dispensing a variety of labeled medicine bottles to his customers who are eagerly clamoring for these bottles. And you can see, of course, and in a different regulatory age when the architecture of regulation that we now know is absent, we see opium bottles, cocaine bottles, nerve stimulants, hypodermic needles available for young children and what looks to be the elite. And then beside him, you have sort of a stereotypical saloon keeper with his cigar and his wonderful mustache. And the saloon keeper is suggesting the kind of drunkard I make is going out of fashion. I can't begin to compete with this fellow. And the idea here is that times are changing, that there is a new age of drugs afoot with the patent medicine industry emerging in the late 1800s as various companies such as Park Davis and others are out searching for different novel vegetable plant-based materials that they can use and perhaps find alkaloids for, some of which would be mescaline, which we'll talk about in a second, and others. So this is one element as the patent medicine industry is kicking off. We also have Freud in 1900 with his interpretation of dreams, and he is appointed professor of neuropathology at the University of Vienna. And so we're beginning to see also a new age in psychiatry and maybe a new way of thinking about neuropharmacological interventions. So here, just dig down a little deeper to show you some of the bottles that are available in this age of drugs. So when we start thinking about this age of drugs that Puck is putting forward in 1900, and which we're arguably still thinking about now, how do we sort of conceptualize this particular age of drugs, which might then help us inform what's happening in the present moment with psychedelics? So let's give you some context for this age of drugs. There are a few different theoretical constructs that can help us sort of pinpoint the age of drugs. One might be boundary objects. Boundary objects comes from STS. This is Griesemer and Starr. Maybe the drug medicine divide, which creates the boundary between licit and illicit medicines. This construct or theory is put forward by David Hertzberg in white market drugs. Maybe we're operating and should be thinking about limbic capitalism as sort of an underlying theory to help us, wrangle with the age of drugs. Limbic capitalism is the type of capitalism where, our brains are being targeted, and this is put forward by David Courtwright, or possibly cycles. And this was essentially a way of thinking about different cycles in drug history, the ways in which ages of drugs actually move in cycles. And then obviously you have other constructs like impure science or co-production created by Jasanoff et al. But I'm going to focus on cycles and just give you a sense of this construct for the remaining period of time here. And then if there is any additional time, go into a little bit of the present moment. So the cycles helps us evaluate careers and cycles of psychotropic medicines. What this particular cycle theory puts forward is that there's been a demand for psychotropic drugs, whether as patent medicines, prescription drugs, natural remedies, or recreational agents, but it has grown steadily since the 19th century, right around the time when Puck put forward its cartoon. These different categories, patent medicine, prescription, natural/recreational, have been in continuous competition with each other, and they share common characteristics. The careers of given drugs operate in cycles, and they are the product of complex interactions among science, medicine, industry, and the public sphere, including subcultures or what we might call the underground. And then they're also closely intertwined with the careers of other drugs. So these drug biographies shouldn't be thought of as individuals, that the drug biographies, whether or not it's psilocybin, mescaline, ought to be thought through in an interconnected way. When you delve deeper into this particular Sega cycle, there are other sort of areas you can pull out, and hopefully you'll sort of be able to stick these in the back of your brain for the rest of the papers. The medical market, according to this particular theory, is that it's made receptive by a number of favorable scientific reports, positive discussions of the new drug by prominent, influential members of science and the media. And you have, consequently, a wave of public enthusiasm making the drug fashionable. So think Hopkins papers, 2006. Think how you see have an upward trajectory after 2006. And then you begin to see other favorable scientific reports. And so you then have public enthusiasm growing with media reports. But according to this theory, the use of the drug, high expectations of its therapeutic effects are usually followed by a negative reaction when it doesn't maybe necessarily live up to overhyped, exaggerated claims. And so this is then you have a sustained process of negative publicity, less favorable experiences, and this is undergirded by lack of convincing data, problems with science, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about some of these problems, and or adverse reactions within the clinical trial setting or in the underground. Think about, for example, an airplane pilot having problems. Finally, the cycle may complete itself through the disappearance of the drug from mental health care, only to be replaced by new and better alternatives. But a drug can also reappear and start a new career cycle related to new factors and different circumstances. For example, a new appealing diagnostic category. And this diagnostic category might be pushed by certain members of the public or certain scientific experts. So think around the 1960s and psychedelics and its failure then, and why has psychedelics come back in the 2000s? What are some of the diagnostic categories, perhaps, or some of the entrepreneurs and champions? So that's one way of thinking a little bit around what's going on and provide context for what's happening with psychedelics in the present moment. I'll just say a little bit about blending biographies of different drugs. And so, for example, peyote, mescaline, cannabis, and heroin. I'll just choose those three. And I'll only speak for maybe 4 or 5 minutes more. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Peyote, cannabis, heroin. A few thoughts. Peyote reached the pharmaceutical industry in 1887. Park Davis, already the world's leading supplier of cocaine, was looking for additional additional mental health medicines that they could put on the market. It began marketing a tincture extract of peyote in 1893, recommending its use as a depressant, a respiratory stimulant, and a cardiac tonic. Then it goes on the market as anhelonium, and you can see this in many publications. It's not till 1897 that Hefner isolates mescaline from the peyote plant, and then it's synthesized not until 1919. Cannabis is got a wide-ranging use in mental medicine. It's first really reported in the 1840s in India, and that information is also communicated through French physicians. You begin to see cannabis marketed as a homeopathic wonder drug for treating mental illness. Cannabis is in the US Pharmacopoeia by 1851. US Dispensatory is noting 20 years later in 1871 that it's excellent for a variety of maladies, and there's a whole laundry list. It also is used for allaying spasms. Heroin, for its part, is developed in 1874 by Alder Wright, and heroin is developed as a curative for morphine. We're seeing rising morphinism in the United States. Heroin comes to the United States after British and German medical reports in New York City. You begin to see one champion in New York City in 1898 sort of take the medical data, synthesize the medical data, and provide a lot of spurious information, in fact, about its non-addictive qualities. Here's a picture of Hefner. Here's a picture of O'Shaughnessy at his lab in India. And I only bring this up because what we're seeing now is claims that are around mescaline and its patentability have been rejected by nonprofit groups. So major RCTs have been concluded, and patent claims have been put forward, and those have been pushed back. Cannabis has become a multi-billion-dollar industry across the United States. Both medical and non-medical cannabis markets are estimated at 25 billion. Hemp-derived cannabis markets, which are not THC, are also around the 20 to 25 billion market valuation in the United States. And then, of course, you have different types of novel interventions, medical interventions that are being promoted, such as cannabis to help you diet, and so on and so forth. Which brings us to the present moment, and I'll really sort of conclude quickly. What to say about Joe Rogan, what to say about Tim Ferriss and Gwyneth Paltrow, other than that they would fit within this entrepreneurial model of helping develop new ideas around psychedelics as wonder drugs, and sort of pushing narratives that are suggestive that these may be cure-alls or miracle cures in some way, shape, or form. Rick Doblin has also been one of the key promulgators of these narratives as a cure-all. Where the psychedelic revolution is headed, according to the guy who arguably started, was a GQ magazine article from 2021. And of course, one might say that Rick Doblin, started the psychedelic revolution here. Of course, getting his PhD here. So I'll leave you with this. I've given a variation of this talk at other places, and I always like to sort of cap things off by suggesting that we're operating right now in a very contested climate around psychedelic medicines, where we have different types of imaginaries, which is a phrase psychedelic imaginaries, which is a phrase that Claudia has coined in one of her excellent papers. These imaginaries then pit different types of individuals against each other. That includes libertarians who suggest that all drugs, irrespective of their biographies, whether or not it's heroin, cannabis, mescaline, or others, ought to be legalized or at the very least decriminalized. You have proselytizers who are creating new churches and are suggesting that they're part of their sort of their religious worldviews, also making the case that psychedelics would change the world. Medical models also are butting up against these different types of decrim legalization models, as well as religious or sacramental models, which doesn't even bring into the picture just yet the importance of indigenous agency and appropriation of traditional knowledges. And I say knowledges because there isn't one specific indigenous knowledge. There are an array, a multiplicity of different types of knowledges that have equal value. And then how to reconcile the open science model with increasing access of data with the idea of investors who are hoping to patent certain materials and make money on a group of medicines, which may or may not be helpful for different demographics and populations. So that'll bring my talk to a conclusion. I want to thank you very much for your attention and look forward to a more wide-ranging conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Luke. That was excellent.